desert, not diving with Scuba.
Just before we get started, a word from our sponsor. AC55ID.com is the fastest growing electronic music marketplace, the central hub for buying, selling, and streaming. 1 cent per stream is the payback rate over there. It's a myth everywhere else, but a reality on AC55ID.com. They also pay 1 cent per stream for podcasts. So if you're watching this on the platform, then we're getting paid. So yeah, thanks for that, because it's not something that happens directly anywhere else. They have their own pressing plant. So if you're doing vinyl as a label, then, well, they can help you with that. They can fulfill, in fact, fan-powered orders to press vinyl on demand. That is pretty amazing. You also keep 100% of your sales on the platform. There is no commission. There is a monthly fee, but as a viewer of Music Not Diving, then you get that fee waived for the first 6 months. Just use the code SCUBA6 when you sign up. So yeah, pretty amazing, right? Head over to AC55ID.com to check them out.
Brought to you by AC55ID.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. Right, some of you may remember last year we did a live event at Lost Village Festival in the UK, an awesome festival. Really enjoyed it. So we did a talk in front of a audience and we had a guest for that talk. That guest was Joe Goddard. So Joe is joining us again to reprise that conversation. Actually, this conversation is completely different. What I find when we've done those sorts of events in front of an audience is it very much changes the nature of the conversation. When you listen back to the audio, they sound completely different to a normal episode. So if you want to go and check that out, well, wherever you get your podcasts, because that was an audio only episode, you can check that out. But this week we are in the studio with Joe for a proper face-to-face conversation, and we get in some really, really interesting topics. For example, his band Hot Chip, how they record their albums, his own solo stuff, his other work in music as a solo artist and as a producer of other bands. And we get into some really interesting scene and industry specific stuff too. So for example, on last week's episode with Steve Hogan, we talked a bit about Kneecap and politics in music, and we very much continue that conversation this week with Joe, and it's just very, very interesting, basically. So yeah, you're going to like this one. It's really, really good. Just before we get into it, a reminder that you can support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/ScubaOfficial. There are 2 very reasonably priced tiers there, both of which get you bonus content. You can also send us a one-off donation if you like. There's a link in the show notes to that. But what we'd like most from you actually is just to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Honestly, there is also a Discord server you can join if you want to talk to me or anyone else who works on the show about the show. hotflushrecordings.com/Discord gets you into that Discord server. And yeah, that's about it, I think. So let's just jet over to the studio and talk to Joe Goddard. Joe Goddard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So this is our second attempt at this, because obviously we did one live on stage.
Yes. Yeah, with very little kind of preparation. But it was nice because there was a nice little crowd of people. It was very kind of informal and just, I enjoyed it. Yeah, that's good.
So that was at Lost Village Festival last year. We actually released the audio of that on the previous incarnation of this podcast, which was the Not a Diving podcast. This is the new one, Music Not Diving, as you can see by the branded paraphernalia in the background. So what have you been doing since then? That was last summer, right?
Last summer, yeah. What have I been doing since then? I've been kind of, I did a bit more touring of my album that came out last year. So I did like
solo album.
Yeah. I did a bit of touring for that in November, like a few European shows and a few UK shows, which was very fun. And, since then been starting to do recording sessions for a new Hot Chip record, which has been a lot of fun. It's like the early days of that when we're just without any real kind of plan getting together in the studio and just jamming and making stuff, which is like kind of, as you probably know, like it's a fun part of making a record before.
And be the fun bit, actually.
Yeah, like before you have to make any like real big decisions about songs or anything, when you can just get lost and kind of make interesting sounds. And, we get on well with each other as a group of people. So it's a very fun time. We're doing that all next week. So that's been good. And then like a bunch of other kind of just collaborative sessions with, kind of diverse different kind of musicians and producers in our studio, which I get a lot of enjoyment out of as well.
Yeah, nice. So how does your solo stuff contrast with your work with Hot Chip? Like, I mean, and sort of, I suppose, looking at it like that, like how did, when you were putting together the recent solo album, for example, how does the process differ, if at all?
Yeah, it's actually like, it's not super different. I have like, I feel like I'm, you know, in the way that a lot of producers will probably say the same thing. Like, I feel like I've developed like ways of making music, and I tend to kind of often stick to them, like pathways into making songs, and they can be the same for me making a solo record as they are with making stuff for Hot Chip. So it's not like it's a super different kind of process. I guess like on a practical level with Hot Chip, you know, there are just a lot of voices that are coming together to kind of make decisions about a track. Whereas,
how many of you are in the room when you're talking about this?
Well, with Hot Chip, like when we play live, there are 7 people, and when we're doing these album sessions, not everyone is always there every day, so it's normally about 5 or so people, and so you're just kind of trying to construct a piece of music that kind of everyone in the room is excited about and kind of has a favorable opinion about. And I guess that's the crucial difference. Like when I'm making a record, in the end, all the decisions are kind of down to me, which can make it difficult. Like, you know, when as a solo producer, it's quite hard to kind of push a track over the line sometimes, isn't it? When you've got something that's 80% done, and it's nice to have another person's voice telling you to keep going and that you're doing something good, or to give you a bit of, you know, a fresh perspective on something. So yeah, it can be difficult on your own. But then the opposite of having 5 voices and sometimes people disagreeing about the direction a track should go in, that can also be hard. But so I guess that's why I like to like do a bit of the group stuff and then do a bit of the solo stuff. It gives me a kind of balance. Yeah.
That must be a nice change in places. So are there, I mean, I don't know any of your other bandmates at all, actually. So what are the, quite often in these situations and in the kind of dynamics between people making music, there can be, you know, loud voices and quiet voices. So how is the group dynamic there? Is there 1 or 2 people who are, you know, tend to take over? Are you the one who takes over?
Yeah. Do you know what this is? I think this is such an interesting question. And it's like, I've been thinking about it a lot over the last few years because I have this studio in Shoreditch that's a bit more of a kind of professional studio now, which I never had growing up. And we have a lot of bands come into this space. And so I've been speaking about this issue when I was doing the press and stuff for my last record. And yeah, as you say, you often do have voices that are loud, and sometimes those people, it's an ego thing. They like to control the direction of a track and the flow of music making. And sometimes as a producer sitting there, sometimes their voices are the most, the best voices, or the voices that you think should be heard. And other times you feel like, I don't actually think your opinion is the best, but you're shouting the loudest. And there might be, someone else in the room who actually has really great ideas, but kind of gets shouted down. So yeah, when I'm part of a group making music, I'm kind of very aware of that. Like there's part of my personality that likes to be in charge and in control as well. And I notice that about myself, that sometimes I'm trying to get my own way or whatever, but I've been trying to kind of step outside of that and just kind of listen to myself and try and, respect the other voices in the room a bit more. But it's difficult, it's a very psychological kind of situation in the studio, and I still find myself guilty of like trying to dominate sometimes when it's not the healthiest thing. I
think this is a common in musicians, generally speaking. I think this is it is a highly egotistical pursuit. I mean, at the base line of it, and particularly for people who reach a certain level of success too, because obviously people get, that selects, I think, for people who are quite egotistical, I think, at least to some degree anyway. I mean, like, you're talking about the you know, the people who get shouted down, absolutely, the kind of George Harrisons of each individual band, and obviously they exist too. But you know, that, you know, the story of George Harrison is that he got pissed off and wanted to leave and do the thing, right? Because you know, he didn't like it. Yeah,
he's an interesting character, isn't he? Because he did get shouted down a lot, and in that recent Get Back footage that there were hours and hours of, like, it felt like his voice was not really valued, but I find it interesting with him because some of his songs are like the most popular Beatles songs that exist, aren't they? So I think it was unjustified in that situation. But sometimes one of the things that happens in my experience is like you've only got a small amount of time in the studio. You've got a day or a couple of days, and you're trying to make every moment count. And the quieter voices are sometimes, you know, they might say something like, I think we should, you know, do something a bit more experimental. I record the piano through some crazy effect and see what happens. And I'm sitting there kind of helping to kind of get the song made. And I'm like, oh, that's going to take ages and I don't know what's going to happen. But sometimes that turns out to be a fantastic idea, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I mean, allowing those kinds of things to happen. And it is a push and pull, like you say, because like there's a lot of value to getting things done and getting things finished and getting, you know, ideas beaten into shape. But then also, I suppose it's, you know, from a production standpoint, it's like, it's allowing those things to develop. So, with Hot Chip, do you kind of self-produce as a collective? Is that how it works? Yeah,
actually, we've done various things over the years. A lot of the stuff is totally self-produced, and our kind of early records that we're most known for really were entirely self-produced by us. And I am kind of like, I do a lot of the production myself, honestly. Like, I kind of sit at the computer and do a lot of editing and putting things together and whatever. But in the last, you know, 10 years or so, we've sometimes put ourselves in the hands of other producers, and that was to give to allow us as a group to be not in charge of that, so that somebody outside of the group can come in and kind of make it a bit more of a level playing field and maybe suggest other things and kind of help us push the music. So we...
when was the first time we did that?
The first time we went to work with this guy Mark Ralph in Kilburn, and like I got to know him through my other group, Two Bears. He was like a friend of our manager, but he's gone on to make lots of kind of massive pop records with various like kind of very successful groups. He produced like Years and Years and lots of like real pop stuff, and he's amazing like writer and mixer and producer. So we made a couple of records with him, and then we went to Paris and made an album with Philippe Sedar from Cassius. Which was amazing experience. He was like a very, very positive, open person that really made us feel good about ourselves. And, you know, we were having just a great time in Montmartre in Paris and going out for lunch. And he made the whole thing like very pleasurable. And he had an incredible studio. This was just before he like very sadly passed away. And yeah, that was an incredible experience. And yeah, we've had a couple of other kind of experiences with different producers, and it is a positive thing sometimes for me to take myself out of that role, and because I feel pressure sometimes being that person that is supposed to kind of put the elements of a song together. Because
is that your role then? Isn't it?
Well, it often is. It's not always. Like, everyone in the group, you know, has moments when they're kind of leading the process and they kind of think a song should kind of take a specific kind of form or whatever. And Alexis Taylor, who's the lead kind of vocalist in Hot Chip, sometimes brings in songs that are kind of very much like he has a total blueprint for, and I just kind of help facilitate that. So it does change a lot, but on a lot of the more kind of dancey up tempo songs, I'm definitely the kind of producer figure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I mean, the obvious question, next question after the good experiences with production. Have you had any particular bad experience with external producers that, I mean, things definitely happen.
Yeah, I guess what tends to happen with those is like they're kind of just abortive, like the song doesn't really go anywhere. Right. We haven't had any that have been like really like just awful where we've ended up shouting at each other or anything like that, but we've had sessions that didn't really lead to anything.
Sorry to interrupt you, but with any of these instances, have you sat down to write an album with anyone? Is that how it's?
No, like, more just like, you know, gone in with someone for a couple of days. Like we got Stuart Price in to our studio in Shoreditch on the last album, and we had a song that we had a good demo of, but we were not sure if it was quite right. And we got Stuart in for a couple of days to just see if we could like rethink the song and improve it. And he was lovely and super cool. We got on with him, but the version that we made with him didn't end up being as good, we thought, as the version we'd had previously. So it wasn't like some awful falling out, but it just...
Yeah, sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. We've never had a real one where, like, you know, you book 2 weeks in a studio with a producer and then end up throwing plates at them, you know, after the first night.
And your studio, from what you were saying, sounds like you produce bands as well.
Yeah, we do. We've done kind of like... more indie type music. Sometimes we have dance producers come in. We made an album with Warm Dusha.
Okay.
With like Quinn from Paranoid London and
he's been on the podcast.
Clams. Yeah, I was listening to that one, and that was a really fantastic experience. They're all everyone in the band is very experienced from other groups, and they came in with like all of the songs kind of quite well rehearsed and written, and we recorded them kind of as live takes, like almost all the tracks, and we did it all in like 2 weeks. And it was, it nearly killed me. It was like, because it was working hard and then also playing very hard with all of those guys. But it was fantastic. Like, it's very like exhilarating.
Yeah, that's kind of like proper record production, right? And this is a question I enjoy sort of interrogating, the difference between music production as commonly understood through the lens of, YouTube tutorial channels, and then the actual, which I suppose is a science to some extent, and then the kind of art of getting a group together and getting the best possible record out of them. Yeah. Right. Because the two things kind of overlap to some extent, but I suppose the traditional role of a producer was very much non-technical, right? I mean, certainly the core skills involved in it.
Yeah. I find it really like endlessly fascinating. Like, I just love the idea of a producer is very amorphous, isn't it? Like, because as you say, you have the producer that's like, a vibes man, like Rick Rubin, who everyone thinks of him, and he'll just kind of walk in and out.
Do you know anyone who's actually ever worked with him?
Not anyone that I've spoken to about working with him. Like, I know there's certain bands that I've met that have done sessions with him, but I've never had a long chat about that. But then you get people that are really hands-on, as well. And then you can have a hip hop producer that's just got an MPC, or, get Lee Perry, who poured concrete into his mixing desk after he got a number one, just so all of the levels would be the same from you.
Is that true, really?
Apparently. So the Brian Wilson approach, or the Quincy Jones approach of like being the person, as you say, who's not really playing or programming, but just bringing in the best people in the world to make the record together.
Yeah, almost like a film director or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I find it like just very fascinating. And then the aspect of it, which is like, as you alluded to as well, like psychologically bringing the best out of the people in the room. Like, I was reading a very interesting article about Billy Joel's producer talking about, he felt like his role was to make Billy Joel feel so comfortable and protected, and like as if Billy Joel was kind of in the womb or something when he was like in the room with the mic and the piano. Like, nothing that he could do as an artist would be laughed at or scoffed at, or so then he would feel comfortable to kind of produce his best work. So all of those elements.
That's absolutely fascinating. Yeah, because the kind of tyranny of the sort of respect of the audience at the back of your mind, and the tyranny that can have over what you feel that you should be doing. Yeah. That is absolutely such a huge barrier, I think, to making man, it must be so many people. I mean, I absolutely experienced that.
Yeah, I feel that. I think for me, that is also a good reason to bring in someone from outside the group to kind of be a producer, because in my mind, I find it quite difficult to disregard the audience, which I know you should do as an artist. But when I'm sitting with the role of a producer, I think most producers have in the back of their mind, like, what might help the song to be successful, you know? So, you know, from my role as trying to be an artist, I find it difficult to divorce myself from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, a very common, you know, experience, I think, of particularly, you know, musicians who've been experiencing a certain level of success, you know, or at any level, actually, just making the music, which has been well received. A lot of the time, people, and this is definitely true for me, and, you know, lots of people I've talked to on the show have said similar things. You try and recreate whatever the conditions were that enabled you to get to that place. And that can be in of itself really quite restricting. Yeah. Right. And, you know, the question for you is, you know, as a group, you know, having had, you know, you guys have been going for 25 years at this point. Yeah. And, you know, as you mentioned, a real kind of, a relatively early breakthrough, right, with the early records. Yeah. How has that been for you? I mean, do you find yourselves it could be an unconscious level, actually, trying to recreate those things at all? Yeah. I mean, like, I don't think it's a conscious decision, but I think one thing that happens is, and this will be very common as well, is like, we play shows and we find that you recognize the moments within the show that are the most successful with the audience, you know, when people are really singing or dancing or have their hands in the air or whatever. And I think subconsciously, when you go into the studio, you're trying to create moments that have that effect. So I think it's really difficult not to consider any of that. It's also when I have another career as a DJ, when you're looking for those moments as well, when people respond to what you play. So yeah, I think it's very difficult to kind of remove all of that from your mind when you're making a new record. But at the same time, like, it's clear that you need to be inspired and trying to, like, break new ground if you want to kind of create something that's really kind of iconic or feels like something new for the group. And so yeah, you're trying to balance a lot, you know, making a new record. I guess one thing that I try to tap into is, like, the moments in the studio if you're kind of jamming together and you feel like you're in uncharted territory. Like, if there's a feeling in the room, like, this is genuinely exciting, like what we're doing right now, this moment of someone's played a certain bass line, someone's played some chords over it, someone's playing a certain rhythm. This feels exciting to me, and, like, recognize that feeling in yourself. It's like, whoa, feels like uncharted territory, something we haven't done, and try to kind of, like, grab hold of that. But yeah, you know, I think you have to try and lean into, like, those feelings and distance yourself from when you feel like you're going through the motions and you're just doing something because you know it's gonna work. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a group, I mean, I've generally I have been a solo artist for basically the entirety of my, so when I've been releasing music, I played in bands when I was much younger. Yeah. That feeling of, like, this is the good stuff, it's happening now. I mean, like, that is something I've talked about quite a bit on the show, is, like, you know, as the experience of a solo producer, you know, in your bedroom, the kind of, like, you know, the sort of, the stereotypical dance music producer, a lot of the time is spent waiting for that moment to happen, right? And you kind of work. Yeah. And then when it happens, it's like, it's unmistakable, right? It's just, this is the good bit. Oh yeah. And you have that feeling of, like, oh my God, I just want to listen to this forever. This is right now. This is fantastic. Yeah. Right. I've hit on a certain synth sound or whatever that's really like, oh my God, I'm so in love with doing this right now. Absolutely. The stars suddenly align. And the gap between those moments can be big. It can be years, actually. Yeah. You know, it really can, especially when you're, like I say, when you're on your own. My question is, like, in the sort of group dynamic, is the experience of those moments different in any meaningful way? That's interesting to think about. I mean,
and it's a funny thing. It's difficult to kind of manufacture, concoct that moment, like you say. You're kind of waiting to stumble upon it. When we're trying to do it within a group, like we're going, as I said, we're going into the studio all next week, specifically to try to create these kind of moments and latch onto something that we feel is exciting. And I suppose that's a fun part about doing it with a group of people, is like it can take a few different forms. Like that, next week we'll have situations where we try to set up a few people kind of jamming together on a few different synths and just playing along to a beat or whatever, and we'll kind of see what happens, see if there's a configuration of like sounds that comes together that feels genuinely cool and good. But then also what happens is you have people breaking off into little clusters. Like we've got a live room with a piano and a drum kit or whatever. So you might get 2 people go in there and work on something and, be trying to like come up with something that's fun, whilst 2 people sit in the control room and like edit something you've been doing and try and come up with like through the editing and the mixing, something that feels fun. So that's kind of a nice thing about it. You can like, sometimes it works for us all to be kind of doing something together, the 5 of us. And other times, if that doesn't feel like anything's being generated, then you can split apart and someone could be going through Alexis has like, notes on his phone of lyrics that he tries over different musical ideas and sees what works. And so you can kind of like come up with different configurations of trying to be creative, which makes it like it's an intense week, and it's hard to balance all of these different ideas and work out what you're going to work on, but it's also quite like productive and quite exciting.
Yeah, I mean that was going to be my next question. Is like, how do you distill down? It must be quite if you're if you're extended jam sessions, right? I mean that's the classic thing. Like, how do you make that into something? Make it into a 3-minute pop song, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is another moment when it's good to bring in another engineer or a producer, because they can help identify the good moments. And also, like, I find like I'm like 45 now. I used to do, when I was, when we were doing this band, when we were like 20 something, I would spend hours at, like going through all of the takes and finding loops. And I'm honestly like, I do that sometimes, but I'm kind of tired of like that process, Yeah. Like I've done that so much in my life. And, I like to kind of hand over the reins to another kind of engineer or producer now and say like, this jam was really good. Can you edit this down into like a more manageable format or whatever? Now, I like to get some help with that, because
I suppose when the precedent has been set about what a hot chip record is, it's a lot easier to do that as well, right?
Yeah. There's definitely like, we have ways of doing it, and we naturally kind of like go in certain directions. But it's like we've been saying, the part of the point of making a new record is to try to break out of any kind of previous modes you had. But it's difficult, I genuinely find it difficult because we have this kind of palette of gear in the studio. We have all these beautiful old vintage synths, and I just get a lot of joy from like playing these kind of sounds that we have used in the past, but they're sounds, I guess, that I grew up with and I feel very like attached to. So we end up going down certain kind of avenues,
I think that like, there's something to be said for that. Absolutely. I mean, we've talked quite a bit on the show previously about the having musical diversity within one act and making big stylistic left turns, and how the industry doesn't, generally speaking, reward acts that do that. And generally speaking, it's not a great idea. I think artistically, a lot of people want to do it. I have to say, and I have done it, and I've done it probably too much as under one project. But as a music fan, the bands that I love, I want them to sound like that band, and it's all very well, there needs to be some kind of development. You don't want to have the same album over and over again. But I think having a sonic palette, like you say, having, some really recognizable signatures, I think that's absolutely positive. And I think that's how you should do it, 100%.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, actually, because I would also say, kind of agreeing with that sometimes I find a very kind of modern electronic production from some artists to be far too kind of schizophrenic.
Right.
You know, you get artists where within one song, the tempo is constantly changing and the whole kind of palette is changing. And I don't know, I don't find that it grips me often. You know, conversely, like there are great artists that are able to kind of, you know, make big left turns within an album or a song, and that occasionally I'm into that. But yeah, I kind of agree. And I go back to when I think about like, you know, real artists that I really, really love and respect. It's very, very, very traditional classic people like Neil Young or someone like that, where there'll be a string of records that are essentially, you know, have a kind of sonic similarity, and it doesn't bother me at all. Yeah, so
yeah, and I think the expectations for their act can be quite wide. I mean, I was served a TikTok the other day, some 90s rock TikTok account that I, you know, may follow.
Yeah.
May or may not follow. That may or may not be on my entire TikTok feed. But it's this guy talking about Smashing Pumpkins and talking about CD2 of Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. And it's like the end of 1979 rather, goes into like a really, really the hardest rock that the Pumpkins get to comes straight after this very much Cure influenced 3-minute pop song. But actually, if you're into the Pumpkins, that made sense at the time. It wasn't, I mean, if you listen to it with zero context, that would be a bit weird. But actually the expectations that they set up at that point meant that it wasn't that weird. It was still a little bit weird, but not that weird. So, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, the same thing all the time. It can just, but it's about, I suppose, the expectations that you create for your audience. And then this, what I guess, you know, that's the relationship that an act has with its audience.
Yeah. And their audience would have understood, that kind of range in the spectrum from those different songs. Yeah. It's interesting that you bring them up, because like that 1979 song still sounds like so completely fantastic to me, like the engineering and production on it, like a total kind of, and that was a bit of an outlier for them, wasn't it? The sound more electronic or whatever, but I feel like it's like such a masterpiece. Yeah.
We actually talked about grunge in that previous conversation.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Grunge was massive for me.
Yeah. Right.
I was just as an anecdote, there was a really funny thing that I saw recently where it was Rage Against the Machine, and like the BBC, it's come up on social media recently. It was like Rage Against the Machine, and the BBC invited them on and told them to do like Killing in the Name of, but told them not to swear. And like, I just found that such a, whatever BBC executive like thought that was going to work, just really like had to really kind of think a bit more deeply about that, because it's got like, it's got "fuck you, I won't do what you tell me" like as the coda to the song. And so the BBC like, okay, we really want you to play this song, but you're not allowed to swear on this program. And clearly, obviously, Zach De La Rocca didn't. Yeah,
right. So here's a topical question. Kneecap.
Yes.
To what extent are Kneecap analogous to Rage Against the Machine?
Yeah, I mean, well, they're analogous in terms of like, you know, they're clearly a political group, and I very much respect their politics. Yeah. And I respect their bravery in kind of, you know, putting up pro-Palestinian things at Coachella, which is a difficult decision to make at a moment when, you know, they're like obviously on a very exciting journey, kind of, you know, breaking into America or whatever. And they've now kind of put themselves in kind of political hot water by doing that. So it was a brave decision, and it's the kind of thing that Rage Against the Machine would have done. You know, their politics are very like deeply rooted in them, and Tom Morello still talks politics all the time. You know, it's a very serious matter for them, and it's clearly a serious matter for Kneecap. But I have like a lot of respect for their stance on that stuff. Yeah, personally.
So would Rage Against the Machine have made that apology? This is what I've been really asking myself this question. I don't know what the answer is, but what's your instinct on that? Because it felt a bit easy. You know, it felt a bit like, it felt like they were undermining their own message.
Right.
By apologizing in the way they did.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I was trying to transport myself back to like 1994, you know, and no doubt, I was trying to transport myself back to the political atmosphere at the time, because I can't even really remember whether apologies were called for of that sort that much.
Yeah.
Because I think the political landscape had moved on since the late 80s, where very much there was a kind of hysteria around metal lyrics, but also rap lyrics. And I think the hip hop thing was definitely had a kind of hangover into the 90s. But I was just trying to remember whether Rage Against the Machine ever were expected to say that kind of thing, and then whether they would have done, whether the artistic, the cultural landscape has shifted in any meaningful sense. I don't know. What are your thoughts on?
Yeah, that I guess it's a big question. Like, I don't remember. Kind of similarly, like, I don't remember moments when they really, really got into trouble. We'd, you know, if you really wanted to kind of like get into that, you'd have to go back and see if there were times when they were kind of, you know, asked to apologize or banned from festivals and things like that. I guess I was like, being a teenager at the time, like, I wasn't so aware of like the, you know, them getting told off by the establishment or whatever as much.
I've just thought of an example. Body Count, Ice-T's group, had that tune Cop Killer, and they definitely got into trouble about that. And I'm fairly sure, again, this is completely off the top of my head. I think, I'm fairly sure they made some kind of not very sincere apology about it. But
right.
Anyway, that's an example I can remember. I can't remember anything about Rage Against the Machine though, so okay.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the political landscape, it, you know, obviously America's going through a very kind of authoritarian moment right now. Maybe that's had a part to play in them being asked to apologize, or like, you know, potentially having their visas revoked or whatever people are talking about in the States with them, like being banned from playing shows or whatever. That feels like could be a Trump related thing. For sure. But, you know, also the question of Palestine is obviously very, very divisive, and a massive question in America, which you find a lot of people end up kind of coming down on the kind of Zionist side, like important people in music and politics and whatever. So has a part to play in them being asked to apologise for this specific issue.
Yeah, well, I think there's two issues, right? So I think, you're right to say that the Israel-Palestine thing is what got them in hot water over there. And then I think over here, it was more the kill your MP bit.
Yeah, of course, in the UK, which I don't really know the full story about that. Was that like an older comment from them?
It's not that old. It's from like last year.
Oh, I see.
But it was like, well, okay, so the kind of arguments go, or rather, the kind of arguments defending them that I've heard, not given by them, but given them by, you know, other cultural commentators, would say that, they've kind of had points in their shows where they've done kind of audience participation chants, and, you know, various incendiary slogans, which are, you know, commonly used in kind of far left politics, like, you know, Maggie's in a box, you know, those kinds of things, which are, you know, pretty juvenile on the face of them, but are commonly used in that area of politics. But are not, I think it's fair to say, ever really meant, certainly in the case of the Kill Your MP one, not meant to be taken literally. I think you can quite easily make that point. You know, I don't think they're seriously encouraging people to, you know, be violent towards their elected representatives. And to some extent that's okay. But, you know, when in the context of, you know, MPs having been murdered, you quickly get deep into much more complicated waters, basically, especially when you become popular and when you start getting the amount of media attention that they've had. And I suppose what we're talking about is them coming up against reality, basically.
Which they clearly have done. I would say like the kind of, you know, the kind of kill your MP thing feels like it devalues the kind of more serious part of their politics a little bit, because it's not a very positive thing to say, is it? But I think you're right, like that, you know, I don't think it was probably quite clear that wasn't supposed to be taken literally.
I think the other interesting thing about them, and I think the biggest story here actually, is the fact that they're willing to go on the record in this kind of a way.
Yeah.
And then particularly, using the biggest, potentially the biggest gig of their lives, Coachella, like global audience.
Yeah.
And willing to take a stand on stuff like, the Israel-Palestine issue, which can be seen in the context, I think, of the Northern Ireland issue.
Yeah,
because that historically has been a big part of that whole thing.
Yeah.
And the two things have overlapped.
Yeah, it's about colonialism, isn't it? And but other people kind of defending them have talked about that. You had like whatever 700 years of the Irish trying to stand up to like a very oppressive like British state, and they, obviously they managed it eventually and won out against that, and so they feel a real camaraderie to the Palestinians. Yeah,
historically that's been that's been and with revolutionary politics in particular. But I mean, my point of I think the sort of inflammatory thing here culturally is the fact that they're willing to do it, because I think since I used Rage Against the Machine as an example, because I think that's the last comparable act who really went hard on and to the extent that it can be taken seriously is debatable, but went hard on armed insurrection in pursuit of revolutionary, left-wing revolutionary goals in the lyrics. I mean, like, there's just nothing, there hasn't been anything that I can think of really in the last 25 years. Certainly no one who's actually willing to actually really make it part of the act. You've had musicians and cultural figures in the arts willing to, make political statements outside of their art, but it's really not been like a big part of it in the way that it was in music in particular, from the 60s onwards, right? Until maybe the end of the 90s. I mean,
yeah, that's true. You had like very like more kind of clearly political acts often. Yeah, and you got obviously a lot of stuff in punk and post-punk times where it's clear kind of left-wing communist or Marxist, like a band like Crass or something, where it was a big part of their DNA to be political. I guess in the last few years, you've had people really embodying and standing up for other causes, more about trans rights and women's rights and things like that. But it's less common for a band to be like overtly political from like a left-wing perspective. Yeah. Or obviously not a kind of right-wing, far-right perspective. Yeah.
I mean, those things have been in the shadows for, it's slightly different. I do think it explains the hysterical reaction though to Kneecap, because they are different in that respect. I mean, do you think that's how welcome is it, and what's your kind of like instinctive reaction to explicitly political musical acts?
I mean,
is it good? Is it inherently good? To what extent is it inherently good? Because I feel like it is good, but like, what does it mean? I mean,
I just respect that bravery. I think it's important, that thing sometimes gets on my nerves within house music of, there's a value to the kind of escapism, and the idea of like having a break from reality and losing yourself in music, and there is a value to that, in collective dancing and kind of being with a group of people in a club or whatever. I feel like that does have actual value, but I'd love for that club music to be more overtly political. And the only way you get that really now is as I mentioned, kind of people standing up against homophobia or something like that, which is clearly valid. But it'd be really cool if within house music there was more of a drive for like kind of more left-wing politics and kind of collective action. I just feel like there's such a need for that in society in general. A pushback against the kind of right wing and populism. I'd love to see that in music more, honestly, myself. I find it difficult because when I'm trying to make music, I don't really know how to weave in like the politics without it feeling like
so
forced.
easy for it to be crass.
Yeah. So I find it difficult, but I that's on my mind. We have actually like a new Hot Chip song that we worked on in the last sessions called "The Mask Is Slipping," which is like a little bit about, you know, hopefully people starting to realise the kind of workings of like capitalism and the fact that, you know, the 1% are clearly kind of like running away with all of our money and leaving a lot of people in society like much poorer than they were in the past. But I just find it difficult to write that stuff generally. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's a positive thing when groups are overtly political. Like I enjoyed the Kneecap movie, and I think what they're saying about Irish culture is valid, and I respected them standing up in that way, like they recently did. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, messages against oligarchy, because that's essentially what it is now, you know, like the 1% has become the 0.0001% basically. And that is, I mean, and there have been cultural voices emerge which are critical of that, which are really valuable, but actually not any means. So I'm thinking of like, you know, actually, you know, YouTubers. I mean, like Gary Stevenson, right, is a great example of this, right? Really good example. But he's not making art. He's a commentator. He's an economist. You know, he's a professional economist, or has been a professional economist, or professional finance guy who, you know, is, you know, broadcasting these extremely powerful messages in opposition to this kind of stuff.
I need to make like an acid tune with him.
Yeah, right, exactly. But like I said, I think that's the courageous message. Because I mean, you're right to say that, you know, people have stood up for, you know, LGBTQ issues. But actually, I mean, I've said more than once on the show before that's actually very much embedded into the wider culture, into the corporate culture, actually. Like it's every major corporation now has a pride event and has a, you know, that's very much baked into, you know, neoliberal capitalism at this point. It really is. I mean, that doesn't detract from the importance of the message, of course, but like, you know, it means like when you say that, you're not really saying anything risky at all.
Against the status quo.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much that. But when if someone's willing to stand up and say, you know, billionaires shouldn't exist, for example, which in my opinion should not be a controversial statement. Yeah. But for many people, it really is. And for many people, the logic behind that is, not well understood, you know, it seems to be, to me, fairly obvious. But, you know, that kind of, which is a left-wing message, by the way, absolutely is. But it's very much a left-wing message of the sort of the traditional left, you know. It's not the identity politics left. It's the left of class struggle. Yeah. Basically. And I think that's been conspicuous by its absence, I think.
Yeah. There isn't like much kind of class consciousness. Turning that into a bit more of a kind of like widespread message in the ways that the right wing have been able to infiltrate a lot of like popular culture and, you know, Joe Rogan or all of the stuff that helped Trump win that election. Feels like if there was a way to make kind of the message of the hard left like kind of disseminated in a similar way amongst more people, that would be a very positive thing. Yeah. I
mean, Rogan's a fascinating one because he endorsed Bernie Sanders last time, you know, and there's, I think particularly within the younger generation, obviously Rogan's not a young man, but his audience is pretty young, I think, you know, particularly young and male, a group who went right in this election. But I think, you know, amongst that cohort of people, those people, I think, in my sense of it anyway, is that people are just looking for something else. Yeah. You know, it's looking for an alternative to a system which isn't working for them. Yeah. You know, and I think someone like, I think the kind of Bernie Bros phenomenon, probably included in the people that followed it and the people that were involved in it, a lot of people who voted Trump at the last election. Right. Yes. So it's not necessarily a, you know, traditional left, right. Yeah. You know, kind of binary choice. I think for a lot of kids today, it's just a sense of like, well, this is not working.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, I feel in in UK politics is the same. There's no, the kind of level of trust in kind of the traditional political parties is just at an all-time low.
And then, yeah, the reform thing. So we were talking off camera that you live down in Folkestone, right? Which is like, as mentioned, Farage Central. Yeah. But it seems like that's a sort of similar thing, because I mean, I think like that brand of politics absolutely has its ugly side, right? For sure. But it also, I think, has appeal for younger people, which confounds, you know, maybe people of our generation who just see it as a sort of like slightly weird far right kind of thing. But I don't think kids necessarily see it in that paradigm. I don't know what you think about that.
I don't know. I mean, it seems so clear to me kind of where they're coming from in reform. But I mean, I don't really know how the youngsters kind of view that kind of politics, but maybe it is just that they're outside of the establishment in some way. So, you know, it's
Farage has definitely been able to position himself like that, you know, on TikTok as much as anything else, I think.
Yeah. And people are kind of so tired of that kind of back and forth between Labour and the Tories, and the fact that nothing changes. There was a real sea change when Starmer removed the whole left wing of the Labour Party that I feel like really just made people feel like the situation was kind of a little bit hopeless. Like I definitely felt like that. So I could understand people just looking for some kind of difference in, you know, the kind of more unusual parties. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it's not an easy question. It's an extremely difficult question. In fact, calling it not easy is a massive understatement. But I mean, I definitely don't agree with the people who just say, you know, reform is just an expression of English racism. I don't think that's true either. You know, really, I think it's just too much of an easy kind of knee-jerk reaction to it too, you know? Yeah,
that's the same kind of thing that's suggested about Trump in the States, isn't it? You know, it's not just like ill-informed working people who kind of associate it with, you know, racism. There are other more serious reasons why people are looking for a real alternative. Yeah,
for sure. Okay. Politics, not. I mean, we don't talk about politics very much on the show at all. I obviously find it really interesting, but I mean, I think the issue of like, you know, musicians being willing to do politics, though, is an interesting one. Let me ask you about. I had a couple of things that, you know, more kind of general music industry issues, what I wanted to ask you about, which I think are quite badly misunderstood. Like, I mean, so broadly speaking, streaming and ticketing, and there was a sort of bogeyman. There has been a bogeyman constructed in both of those areas, Spotify and Ticketmaster, which I think is probably, again, a little bit of a sort of simplification of the main issues. Like, what are your, let's talk about streaming first. Let's take streaming as a topic of conversation. Over the course of your 25 years of releasing records, like you started off in the physical era, there was the downloads era, now there's the streaming era, which is sort of fracturing slightly to some extent anyway, with the kind of I would characterize that as there was a kind of emerging direct to consumer element, I think, which has become more important, particularly for sort of underground artists. But in this quarter of a century, what are your observations, generally speaking, of that? And then let's get into whether or not streaming is evil.
I mean, okay, so like it at that moment when everyone was just illegally downloading, you know, I just remember the despair amongst a lot of the industry at that moment, and there wasn't really any kind of like, you know, light at the end of the tunnel for a while. You know, people thought that was just going to be it. It was going to be kind of difficult to sell people music anymore in any way. And so as Spotify became a kind of more of a viable thing, you know, that felt like a bit of a kind of rejuvenation of the music industry. And obviously that has been very successful for labels. You know, labels earn quite a significant amount of money from streaming.
I actually ran the numbers on this the other day. So the 2024 payouts from Spotify alone, so not the streaming industry just from Spotify were adjusted for inflation, basically the same, it's roughly the same amount that was paid to rights holders, so basically labels, by the entirety of the recorded industry in 1999. So it's really big, basically.
Obviously, the issue that leads on from that is like the amount of money that labels give to their artists for streams, and I think that's a thing that definitely needs to be kind of improved quite massively. But
do you have let me just on that? Do you have a sense that people get better deals now versus 25 years ago?
I mean, I'm kind of unaware of like the deals that people are making as new artists. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess that just depends on how powerful they are as a prospect, as an artist, and what, how they can negotiate the deal. I would say deals are probably not great. Like, what's difficult for us in our position as Hot Chip is like a similar thing to what Kieran Hebden went through with his label Domino. Well, we're signed to the same label Domino, and he went through this process of basically arguing with them that the rates that had been agreed for streaming back when he signed, which is a historical deal from 20 plus years ago, were not fair because the costs for the label are so minuscule with streaming that more of a profit should be passed on to the artist. And streaming at that point was considered to be a kind of niche thing that was not super important. And now it's obviously like for artists, it's a massive kind of source of income. So he successfully argued with them and changed his royalty rates with the label. But we're in a similar situation where the royalty rates are pretty tiny. And I think that needs to be made much more in the artist's favour. But I don't know what new artists are able to kind of bargain and kind of ask for from labels.
Okay. Yeah, sorry I interrupted you on that. But, you were in the middle of a sentence, so I can't remember what to say. We're talking about, I mean, your experience, generally speaking. I mean, has it affected? Well, yeah. I mean, has the sort of perception of what recorded music is worth over that period affected your music making at all?
That's a real crucial question, isn't it? Like the value of recorded music and
the perceived value as well.
Yeah.
Like I said, because I think I sort of what I'm getting at here is whether what we all see as being value is actually real. But I mean, go on.
Well, I mean, I just think it, culturally, it's a real interesting question. And it's clearly been an enormous kind of unimaginable cultural shift from, if you think of the position of, artists making records in the 60s, for instance, when, I remember my dad telling me a story about, a Beatles 7-inch coming out and it getting played 25 times in a row at the house party that Friday night with his friends. That was how important that artifact was.
Right.
Whereas that idea is kind of unimaginable. There's just this crazy surfeit of forms of entertainment and wealth of entertainment within music, within gaming, within, TikTok. People's options for entertainment are just unimaginably vast compared to that situation of going back 50, 60 years. So the value of music in itself, I think, is massively, massively devalued from that point in time. And all culture, the dominant form of culture now is obviously TikTok or, short form videos that people can scroll through at, a rate of knots or whatever on their phone. That's what people spend most of their time consuming, and trying to get people to focus on a song or anything that's longer than 18 seconds is just really, really difficult. And obviously the value of recorded music has changed in terms of the money that people earn from it for that reason as well. And it's, I don't know if that's ever going to change henceforth, you know?
Sure. I mean, just to clarify the statistic that I gave before about the overall value of the industry. The obvious caveat to that is that it's being split vastly more ways.
Yeah.
So because there are vastly more musicians trying to make a living from music now than in 1999.
Yeah.
So maybe the overall pie has grown, even adjusted for inflation.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help.
No.
Musicians really.
Yeah. It's being split. I mean, and that's about the kind of democratization of music production, isn't it? Like you can have
distribution,
and like a billion producers on their laptop or even on their phones making music, which is on the face of it like a really wonderful thing. Everyone has a right to do that, but it just means that that, as you say, that pie is being split in a billion pieces. Compared to what it would have been. Going back to kind of the depths of history where a band would have to work really hard to even get a record made and released.
Absolutely, yeah. And just having to spend X amount of money to do so. So plurality of popular culture and entertainment, short form video, these are things which are as or at least as bad, I think, probably in terms of aggravating factors in creating the conditions in which streaming becomes this kind of evil thing, right? Because I guess what I'm getting at, what I'm trying to get you to agree with here, or to some extent, or maybe or to any extent, is that there are a plurality of reasons why music seems to be less valuable. Yeah. Right. And Spotify, maybe to some degree, has, and some of its business practices and some of what goes on the platform, what kind of thing, some of that, okay, it's not, I'm not trying to defend Spotify, to any real extent. But the reasons that music feels less important are more than just the streaming quote unquote revolution. Right?
Yeah. There are a lot of reasons, kind of, as we've been discussing, but also, I spent a nice kind of morning on the train in the sunshine this morning, going through Spotify, listening to a bunch of stuff, and just how easy it is to just flick and go from any number of artists in this universe of great music. Just that in itself kind of devalues it as in terms of that kind of platform in comparison to the past, where it was much more of a kind of, a decision to kind of, make the effort to go to a record shop, pick up a vinyl release or whatever. There was a lot more like intentionality in that, wasn't there? As a
putting
fan.
Something on, you got to pick an album from your
list, just the work that goes into that in all aspects, So it's obviously incredible that we can pick up our phone and have this universe of music at our fingertips, but it does also, it very easily kind of adds to that sense of like each artist being like kind of less valuable,
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how you really kind of would prevent that. Whatever the platform is, whether it's Spotify or one of the others, that's just entertainment in the modern world, isn't it? You can also go and get whatever film you want or whatever TV program or anything,
Sure. Yeah. Well, this brings me neatly and nicely onto ticketing, because I think that value, and the one thing we didn't touch on there was AI, which is another kind of like aggravating force in muddying the waters here. Yeah. But my kind of pet theory here is that the various forces affecting recorded music are going to mean that more and more value gets pushed towards live performance, right? And the value that the value that music fans ascribe in their patterns of consumption, where they're willing to spend their money, will I think increasingly accrue towards people who can demonstrate that they can play music, they can actually play. Yeah, right. Basically.
Like humanity of that kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Something that can't be faked, basically. I think that classical musicians, for example, are going to get paid much more in 50 years' time. That's my theory, anyway. But with ticketing, so Ticketmaster being the other kind of bogeyman that people like to beat with a stick, and the actual details of it are actually quite murky, and there's various theories and various the Michael Rapino and the other guy, the Fred Rosen guy, who's I think his predecessor, have come out and done various interviews where they kind of explain it a bit, and explain the role of the company in the industry, which to some degree is to take heat for musicians, particularly for big acts who are able to charge lots of money and piss off their fans. And to some degree, Ticketmaster's role is to take the heat for that. But I mean, the reason that I want to talk about it is because everyone says that musicians should get paid more. Everyone seems to agree on that until it's time to pay them more in the form of slightly higher ticket prices. Right. And then the enthusiasm seems to evaporate pretty quickly. Right. So, what, if any, is your experience with Ticketmaster? That's a good place to start. And is Ticketmaster, do you have any direct experience here, like with Hot Chip or anything like that?
I mean, I'm not so involved in like the kind of dealings with them as a body. Like, they've definitely kind of been involved in Hot Chip tours in the past. And I've been kind of on the receiving end of this whole question, and feeling kind of aggrieved at having to pay these massive kind of fees to go and see people. But yeah, I don't really know the ins and outs of like how our management have kind of dealt with them as a body. I would just more generally say that, like, even though I agree that ideally this situation that we've been talking about of kind of music being devalued and people kind of wanting to go and see musicians in the flesh, that hasn't really borne out in terms of like a lot of bands. Over the last like 10 years, I've seen a lot of kind of mid-level kind of indie-ish type bands actually ending up like touring a lot less than they used to, because a lot of the costs have really risen, and it's to do with Brexit and whatever. Costs within the industry for touring have really grown. So bands don't tour as much as they used to.
I mean,
either.
let me just interrupt you to say, surely that means ticket prices should be higher, right?
Well, higher
to make it viable.
Well, at the same time, like for the audience to be expected to pay more is obviously like a really difficult ask, because people are going through like crazy difficulties in even paying for their heating. That's why kind of, we touched on politics in music earlier, and a thought that's kind of been going around my head a lot is like, I feel like I need to be more active politically, just for all of these reasons. Like, we're clearly in this kind of, as Gary Stevenson speaks about, we're clearly being taken for a ride, and it's impacting all of our ability to do all of these things, like just to operate within society as a normal, working class or middle class person, to be able to afford to heat your house and occasionally maybe go and see a band. All of these things are just becoming incredibly difficult. So I'm starting to feel like maybe, I love kind of going into the studio and just making music with Hot Chip, but maybe my time would be better spent like being just a bit more active politically and trying to kind of draw people's attention to all of these ideas, because our normal lives are just being made like increasingly kind of unworkable,
Sure. I mean, obviously, the danger is with ticketing and the kind of really aggressive high ticket prices, which to some extent is, I think, defendable from an artist perspective, because you should get paid fairly for you, and for what is fair, what's a fair ticket price? It's what people are willing to pay. But the political context means that the danger is that the danger is that live music becomes something that only rich people can go to. Right, which is bad, unambiguously bad.
We're already reading a lot of these articles about anyone apart from the elite kind of being able to make their way into the industries of like making music or television, or becoming actors, becoming artists, which you're seeing a lot. You see it all the time, and it's a massive difference to the people that had access to becoming artists in the 70s and 80s in this country. You don't want these things to become the preserve of just the rich. Clearly, like that's a terrible kind of injustice. Yeah.
I mean, it's a difficult circle to square, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because everyone wants artists and creative people to be paid. but it's a market situation, right? I mean, you touched on this, but the other economic backdrop to this is, inflation and rising costs and everything that has surrounded that. Like, come back to you guys again. Have you seen that materially change the kind of economics of your touring in the way that, and how has it affected your touring plans, the rest of it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it just does. It's really, really expensive for us to be able to kind of go on tour these days. And it's partly like because we have a certain level of comfort touring. We bring like a fair number of like crew members with us and quite a lot of like stupidly heavy, massive synthesizers and equipment, which clearly we could cut back on, and we may need to in the future. But we love to put on this kind of fairly extravagant live show where there's a lot of musicians on stage, there's a lot of technicians, and there's a lot of equipment, and we love to play that show. It's what we loved about going to see bands when we were younger, and it's something that brings us a lot of joy, like the feeling of being 7 people on stage all playing instruments and playing together in a quite live way with a proper kind of like set of monitors and everything. And we're trying to resist the kind of modern interpretation of a live band of coming on stage with like 2 or 3 people and very little gear. And cutting down on musicians and crew members. But it's really, really difficult economically to make it work sometimes. And it means that the tours tend to be shorter, meaning that, it's harder to secure the crew members, and there's less work for a lot of crew, I think, in this country these days compared to what they used to be kind of 5-10 years ago. Everything is more difficult. Yeah. And it's unfair that all of these costs are passed on to the consumer in terms of ticket prices, but yeah, they kind of have to be in a way, because it's not easy it's obviously you have people at the top end of the spectrum like Taylor Swift or whatever, absolutely coining it. But there isn't this kind of, working economy for like smaller bands that there used to be when I was growing up at all.
Yeah, and that only works if costs can be kept right down. Yeah, basically.
So you're asking for something fairly kind of substantial, like for the government to be able to kind of step in and regulate some of these industries, and maybe kind of step into ticketing and try to reduce the amount of money that ticketing companies take, and also somehow keep costs down in terms of like bands traveling abroad and whatever. It's a complex thing for the government to kind of regulate, but it feels like that's probably necessary at some point. Yeah. I mean, it is hard, isn't it? Right? Because I mean, like, how do you pick who gets subsidized? To some extent, like if you're, we're saying there's so many people trying to do this. Yes. Like, how do you, say who deserves government? I mean, obviously the arts count does exist, and they do to some extent this already, but it's very difficult. Yeah. And that kind of like vetting process would be super complex and require more people working on it at a time when government is like cutting arts budgets and cutting funding for all of these things, and even cutting down, like people working for the government, as has been happening with Doge in the States. People are trying to cut government back to the bone. I would say, like, I'm, more of the opinion that there should be like more money spent by government on all of this stuff, funded by the mega rich in society. Okay. Some good solid left-wing politics on this episode. Yeah. You mentioned you're a DJ, and obviously the DJ business model is a thing of beauty if you're wanting to make money from music. Yeah. As you were saying that, and I thought of that question, like, I mean, the kind of, I suppose, unintended consequence of that comes into, well, one of the unintended consequences, or just the consequences, is in the kind of music that gets made, right? And if you're DJing, if your performance is as a DJ, then you will make DJ music, right? And I think one of the things we touched upon in our previous conversation was the relative decline of bands, and something we've talked a little bit about on the show, and how the music that sounds like that, the fact that it's no longer profitable really to perform it probably means there's going to be less made of it. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, how does your experience as a DJ
affect your music, and you know, also the wider implications perhaps of the profitable nature of a DJ model?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely, you know, I try to, you know, in the process of kind of auditioning tracks for DJing and kind of trying to take note of, you know, interesting new dance records that are coming through from different places, and the effect that they have on a crowd and whether things work or not. You know, I feel like all of that feeds into the music that I try to make with Hot Chip or as a, you know, a solo producer in the studio. So having that thing of going out and DJing occasionally definitely influences my kind of inspiration when I go into the studio, and that's pretty obvious. As to your other point about the kind of music that's being made, because of the economics of being a DJ, which are far more straightforward. You know, you turn up with a USB stick and no,
You get paid.
yeah, no one else traveling with you. You know, clearly that makes it like very, favorable as a business decision. Yeah. But, that, I guess that's just a shame. Like the economics of getting a band together, you know, that would mean these days of like a bunch of young people affording to be able to kind of live in London and make time in their week to get together in a rehearsal space and rehearse music together. That's just a much more difficult thing to achieve than it was like 30, 40 years ago in itself. So I think that's one of the reasons why there aren't so many bands kind of making it. And I guess DJ culture just seems to be so kind of prevalent at the moment. I'm honestly kind of, I get, maybe it's just because I'm an older guy, but I'm missing that energy of like the kind of raucous kind of punkiness of bands and things. I'm missing that a little bit in music. And I really like DJs who are able, I'm thinking of like people like Optimo or whatever, that can bring some of that energy, like rebelliousness, kind of sometimes political and punky and bandy kind of feel to their DJing music. You know, that's something that I really am looking for in club music myself at the moment. But yeah, it's clearly like not something that is really on a lot of people's minds, I guess, right now.
And I suppose what you've just said also explains to some degree the popularity of Kneecap, right? Because they are absolutely that.
Yeah, they really are like, you know, there's a lot of energy, like kind of anger and like rebelliousness from them, and they're also like very charismatic. You know, the film that was made about them I thought was really cool, and they did an amazing job of like acting in it as well as being musicians. So yeah, they're like, that explains a lot about their popularity. You know, or there are certain other bands that could fit into that kind of gang, but it's something that I really, I guess, you know, speaking about like grunge and things like that, like that was one of the first kinds of music that I really kind of related to as a young teenager. So I'm kind of missing that energy and that spirit at the moment. Yeah,
absolutely. Joe, this has been great. Let me ask you a couple more to finish. So first of all, we've been quite doomy in the last hour. What are your main reasons, or what are some reasons, or a reason you can think of to be optimistic about music, making music, or anything to do with music? I
mean, like, just on I think in terms of the business side of it, you know, it's real difficult right now. And I don't think there's any getting away from that, but that just doesn't stop me from like just absolutely loving the process of making music, you know, and something that I do every week and go into the studio and work on a variety of different things. And that just is totally undiminished, you know, when I kind of sometimes have to divorce myself from that thinking about, you know, 10,000 tracks being uploaded every day to Spotify or whatever. I can't think about that. Yeah. Whatever. Like I'm deluding myself, but I have to kind of keep that out of my mind. But just the creation of like work with friends or whatever, and that collaboration and making something together is just completely wonderful, and I'll just never stop doing that. And I'm working with like young artists who are not so kind of like jaded and just really like up for the creation of stuff and really excited about the prospects for it. So that kind of keeps me going like massively, I would say. Yeah, just as a personal thing, I get so much like fulfillment from that. Yeah.
Last question. What are your top 3 grunge records?
My top 3 grunge records.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like...
I mean, so that's got to be made before 95?
Right.
That's the cutoff.
Like, I'm a massive Pavement fan, so like something by Pavement, and that's interesting because there's a film that just came out recently about them, so they've been on my mind.
Really? Okay, okay.
Yeah, it's like a kind of part fictional, part documentary called Pavements that I haven't seen yet, but I really want to go watch, and so like their first album, Slanted and Enchanted, was really big for me. And their second record, Crooked Rain, they were probably all made. They were definitely made before that cutoff point that you just mentioned, and then just like big stuff like Siamese Dream was like enormous record for me. Like I can pinpoint the moment that I heard it for the first time, and the sound of like the first track, like Cherub Rock maybe, just like hit me so hard. The size of the music and how grand and like epic it was. So that was massive for me. And yeah, probably like a Nirvana record, you know, like pretty big ones. But yeah, like.
Which Nirvana record though? I thought you were going to
like
nail colours to the mast there.
Yeah, I mean, probably Nevermind, to be honest. Like I only got into them from Nevermind onwards. I didn't know Bleach until later. Yeah. But like, Nevermind just hit me at exactly the right moment in my life, like on a, you know.
Did you see them on Top of the Pops that time they went on Top of the Pops? Yeah, I watched that too.
Yeah, and other kind of those other live performances that they did around that time on UK TV, and they were just so exciting. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Joe, this has been great. Thanks so much, man.
Cool. Thank you.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.